Yes, the recording will be available to you afterwards, and we'll send it to you all via Eventbrite. Okay, Ole, happy to get started. I'll just be admitting people whilst it begins.
Okay, let's get started now. I'm Ole Petersen, Director of the Academia Europaea Cardiff University Knowledge Hub, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar dealing with the European Scientific Advice Mechanism. We have a lot of interesting elements coming up, and I hope you will enjoy this webinar. So the European Scientific Advice Mechanism will be discussed in considerable detail during this webinar. And here in these few introductory remarks, I will just address the general question about why academies have essentially been provided as scientific evidence givers. So on this slide, which we don't want to go into too many technicalities because they will come up later on, I basically address the question of how scientific evidence is provided by academies in response to questions from the European Commission. And the architect of the scientific advice mechanism, which basically started in 2016-17, was the then Director General of Research and Innovation, Robert Jan Smits, who also was the architect of the European Research Council, by the way. And his idea was to use the existing European science academies as the basis for giving the evidence that would then help the group of chief scientific advisors to formulate scientific opinions to the Commission in response to questions from the Commission. So why choose academies? So the primary evidence organizers, as it were the so-called Scientific Advice for Policy by European Academies, a peer organization. You will hear a lot more about that later. But that links in, as this slide shows here, to the many European national science academies. I've only illustrated three very old ones established in the 17th century, the Academia Europaea in Rome, the Leopoldina Academy in Halle in Germany, and the Royal Society in London. But of course, virtually every European country has its own science academy. Some countries even have several science academies. So this is a huge basis for finding experts in virtually any scientific area. And the importance of using academies is that in order to provide evidence that is usable, it not only has to be high quality evidence, it also has to have a kind of authority, that there is some kind of authoritative stamp behind it. And as a little amusing anecdote to illustrate that, I show in the right part of this slide a letter from Bertrand Russell's brother, Lord Russell, when Bertrand Russell was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. And you see there his brother, who was not a scientist, in contrast to Bertrand Russell, who of course was a famous mathematician and logician, his impression of the importance of being a Fellow of the Royal Society. So it's just one particular illustration in anecdotal and quite amusing form of the kind of reputation that people who are elected to these grand national academies had, and extends to many other academies. So this was actually the basic idea behind the scientific academies, to use this huge knowledge base that is contained in the academies. And I won't say any more about this because many of the details will be disclosed in a moment. So the program is here on the screen. We already had now the welcome from me, and we are moving on to the welcome from UPEN by William Pryor, who is head of policy engagement at the University of Oxford and also co-chair of UPEN's international subcommittee, as you see here on that slide. So I will stop sharing my slides now, and I will invite William Pryor to continue. We are not having discussions between talks because of limitations of time, so we will have a question and answer session at the very end of the program, as illustrated on this slide.
Thanks, Ole. I pick up the baton from you. So yes, just to second what you said about the warm welcome. So this is a collaboration in partnership with the Future Leaders Fellows Development Network and a collaboration with Academia Europaea in Cardiff. My job is just to say welcome on behalf of UPEN, to thank Ole and Karen and Toby and Richard and Pearl for making time for today's session, and to Louise for thinking of doing it in the first place and planning it, and Jade for helping alert all of you to it, and thank you all for coming. So just a few words on UPEN. It was originally described to me as a therapy group for people like you, research professionals in UK universities who have been hired to go and make policy engagement happen. It was actually established in 2018, so the University of Oxford, where I work, was a latecomer to the network. It was originally a small group of institutions there to try and increase coordination between universities in their efforts to be useful to policy and provision of evidence. It's the only UK university network of its kind. The membership has grown, Jade, correct me if I'm wrong, to somewhere just over 110 institutions across the UK, mixture of research intensive and specialist institutions, and basically provides a platform to connect research professionals in UK universities with research users in local, regional, national government, legislatures, public services, and third sector organisations. So if you are a researcher in one of those universities, or you think you might be and you want to check, head over to that link that I think is now in the chat, upen.ac.uk, and you'll start receiving UPEN's weekly newsletter, which includes evidence requests and opportunities for engagement from across national government and beyond, as well as blogs and signposting to useful resources. The International Subcommittee, I think, is of limited interest per se. It's one of 6 subcommittees in UPEN, and I co-chair it along with colleagues at Durham University and Southampton University. The subcommittee explores new ways for UPEN to add value to the work of individual UPEN member institutions when it comes to supporting engagement with policy professionals outside the UK. That's by individual research professionals, institutions, groups of institutions, and with UPEN itself. So a relatively high profile example of this would be our collaboration last year with the Royal Society and Ukrainian policy partners, bringing together researchers from Ukrainian and UK universities and policymakers to explore how research can help tackle some of the challenges facing policymakers, from rebuilding Ukraine's economy, addressing needs related to health and well-being, etc. We're also keen as a subcommittee to develop our learning and development offering. So today's seminar is, we hope, the first of several aimed at helping research professionals understand how policy professionals outside the UK use research and other evidence, what systems and mechanisms exists, so that they can engage with those more effectively for mutual benefit. And I think that's all I would say, Ole, and hand back to you. Thank you.
So I will pick up from here and share some slides with you. Everyone see the slides? So the next presentation will be from a team of 3 people: Karen Fabry from RTD at the European Commission, Toby Wilson at UPEN Communications, and myself, Louise Edwards from Academia Europaea Cardiff. I'm going to look at 4 areas in the next 20 minutes. We'll start by looking at how European policymaking works. We'll then look at the role of the Scientific Advice Mechanism, SAM for short. Well, then Toby will look briefly at how the evidence review process works within the SAM. And then I'll finish up by giving you a few examples of the SAM in action. And then we'll hear from a member of the working group and a member of the advisors on their perspective of the SAM. So over to Karen.
Thank you, Louise, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Fabry. I work at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation in the European Commission, where we have a unit called Science for Policy, Advice and Ethics. And the SAM Secretariat actually sits within that unit. So I'm going to be giving you a bit of an introduction on SAM, and Louise has asked me to add a slide in general on EU policymaking. I'll try and keep it quite brief because it's actually quite a complex process, but I've tried to slim it down for the sake of today's discussion. So within the EU, we have 3 main bodies, let's say, that make legislation. The European Commission is the body that I guess you could say corresponds to your ministries. It combines different ministries of different, well, we call them directorate generals, corresponding to agriculture, trade, energy, research, environment, you name it. There's more than 20 of them, and they make up the European Commission, and which is basically an executive body. So we propose legislation. Then these pieces of legislation go to Parliament and the European Parliament and Council for co-decision. And there's basically a ping pong back and forth until things are adopted. Now, if we zoom into the European Commission, I mentioned that there's many directorate generals. Each directorate general is represented by 1 or sometimes more commissioners. The commissioners for the new commission, that is, have just undergone, they've just finished their hearing. So we're going to be appointing a new commission and with a new set of priorities. Now, my commissioner is the Commissioner for Research and Innovation. The SAM, although the SAM sits within DG Research and Innovation, much of the recommendations and opinions that come out of the SAM actually go to the other, what we call policy DGs, and don't necessarily, the objective of SAM is not to feed research and innovation policy. I think it's really important to understand that the SAM really is meant to support thematic policies of the Union. Just a brief overview of the EU policymaking cycle. That's the circle on the right. If we start with the dark purple, things really start there. Before we make a proposal, the Commission makes a proposal. It needs to be accompanied most of the time with what we call an impact assessment. And it's really critical that that impact assessment is largely based on evidence. So the science has a great opportunity of coming through within that impact assessment process. Then the Commission makes a proposal. It then goes to, well, the different bodies. There's a feedback loop. These pieces of regulation or legislative acts then need to be implemented, so transposed in the member states, so that they can fit their national legal system, their national realities. And then, of course, there's a whole process of evaluation and monitoring, and at times, let's say, review of policy, and then, you know, the cycle starts again to ensure that the policies do remain let's say, relevant. Now, I don't know what the case is in the UK, but we've noticed that this whole structure, the way in which decisions are made, especially with respect to the Commission, the Commission must propose legislation that is co-owned by the college. That means all commissioners of all the director generals agree on a proposal that is sent out. Now, I don't know if that's the same case at the national level. If you have a piece of legislation that is addressing an issue that covers multiple domains, I don't know to what extent your national ministries actually sit together at the same table and need to co-decide together. But that's how the Commission works in terms of its decision making. Maybe we can move forward, Louise. Thanks. Next slide. So the SAM, the Scientific Advice Mechanism, who are we? We provide independent scientific advice, and I underline the word independent, and policy recommendations to the European institutions by the request of the College of Commissioners. So the College of Commissioners means the whole group of commissioners. Maybe we can go to the next slide. It's divided into 3 parts. So I'm here to represent the part in blue, the SAM Secretariat. We have another part that's called the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors, and another part of the SAM is the SAPEA Consortium of Academy Networks. Now, SAPEA is actually funded as a Horizon Europe coordination and support action. And I think Toby will be giving you more insights into that. And I'm going to zoom into the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. Thanks. Next slide. So, in detail, if you look at the parts in blue, so the SAM Secretariat is, let's say, the liaison with the College of Commissioners, with the other Directorate Generals, and sits within DG Research and Innovation. We also work very closely with another Directorate General that is called the Joint Research Center, that is considered the in-house evidence-based capacity of the Commission. Then if we move on to the pink side, so the group of chief scientific advisors and SAPEA are supposed to represent, let's say, the scientific community. So we currently had, or we had up to very recently, 7 scientific advisors. This is who they are. The chair is Nicole Grobert, and she's supported by vice chair and other members. Now, 2 of these members have finished their mandate in October, and most of these members will be finishing their mandate in spring of 2025. For this reason, we have recently launched the process of, let's say, recruitment, nomination, and subsequent recruitment of new chief scientific advisors. And this is a process that is quite heavy. It takes nearly 6 months to complete. We sent out invitations to research organizations, public research organizations, already in, I think it was August of this year, inviting them to nominate their best scientists. And then we received these nominations, invited those scientists to apply, and we have an independent identification committee that is going to be reviewing the CVs, the motivation letters, undergoing interviews with those that will be shortlisted, to then come up with a new bunch of scientific advisors by next spring. Next slide, please. So who are these advisors? There's 7 highly qualified experts. They have backgrounds in various fields and disciplines, both in the social sciences and natural sciences. It's very important that the group be really interdisciplinary. They make policy recommendations in response to requests for advice. And recommendations are based on publicly available scientific evidence. Next slide. So who are we in the SAM Secretariat? We're a small team of about 5 people or so within, as I said, DG Research. We act as the liaison between the SAM and the European Commission. We help coordinate the scoping paper, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that in the next slide. And we support the advisors with administration, with record keeping, and we work very closely with SAPEA to communicate about the work of SAM. Next slide. So we have quite a robust process that we implement together, and how it works in the simple version is we basically get a request. So the request must come from high level. It generally comes from one or more commissioners. They can ask on advice on any topic. We then review, we ask SAPEA to review the evidence, and then the advisors with that evidence make recommendations, and they issue what's called a scientific opinion. And then that opinion is delivered back to the requesting commissioner and the college. Next slide. So of course, it's more complicated than that. If we zoom in, what we can see here is that, in fact, although the commission is the one that is requesting most of the opinions at this moment, we have enabled the process to also welcome requests from the Parliament and the Council. This hasn't happened yet, but there is a window of opportunity for it to happen in future. The parts in the dark parts in black, they relate to the activities that the Secretariat is, or rather that the Commission is focusing on. So the scoping paper is basically the question that, the leading question and sets of questions that will determine everything else that happens. So they relate to the concerns that the commissioners may have. And it takes quite some time to refine that question to ensure that the issue that needs to be addressed is not already value laden, because we don't want to bias the results that are going to come out in the end of, the scientific assessment. So it takes quite a while of, say, iterations with the requesting DGs to ensure that the question, the framing, is fit for purpose. So once we have an issue that merits scientific advice, this is then handed over to the group of chief scientific advisors. They give a green light whether yes or no we should move forward with this. If so, then we ask SAPEA to conduct the review of the available scientific evidence. Now, this means setting up working groups. I'm not going to go into that because I think Toby is gonna provide you more information. But what comes out of this process is a very robust and thorough evidence review, which is a key deliverable for the chief scientific advisors to then extract recommendations. So the chief scientific advisors base themselves on the evidence review report and the scoping paper, and another deliverable which isn't listed here, which is the policy landscape, because it's not enough just to know what the science is telling us. We have to make sure we have an understanding of what the policy situation or baseline is. So with these deliverables, the chief scientific advisors are afterwards able to extract findings, recommendations. These recommendations, the draft recommendations, are then bounced off of experts during hearings. They're also bounced off of the policy officers and the commission, because we have to make sure that they're relevant, and we also bounce them off of stakeholders. So it's quite a thorough process to come up with a final set of policy recommendations, which are then handed over to the commission, and then they enter a process of they can feed or they can seed debate that then leads to better policy development and implementation. I think that's my last slide, and I believe I should be handing over to Toby now.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'll take over just to talk for a minute or two about the SAPEA part, the evidence gathering part of the SAM's work. I'm glad that you, Karen, tackled what we affectionately call the sausage diagram, because I always find that terrifying to try and present, and you did it very nicely. So Karen mentioned about the work of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors and that their policy recommendations are informed by an evidence review that's produced by SAPEA. So who is SAPEA? We are basically a group of, it says around 110. I just looked up a minute ago. It's now 121 academies from across Europe. The number fluctuates depending on, academies are founded and merged and so on. Those academies are grouped into 5 networks, which are shown here on the left: Alea, Eurocase, FEAM, IASAS, and the Academia Europaea. Each of those networks, with the exception of one, covers a different area of disciplinary work, and Academia Europaea, which is represented today by Louise in this meeting, is a pan-European academy on its own. So those networks group together these academies and they form SAPEA. Their role is to provide expertise across all the scientific disciplines. And when we've been talking about science, it's worth mentioning, because we have here a UK audience, that the meaning of the word science in terms of scientific advice mechanism is more like the German word Wissenschaft. It covers all areas of scholarly research and evidence gathering, not just, as you might expect if you're a British English speaker, it's not just the natural and social sciences, but also includes the humanities and even sometimes the arts. And the role of these academies then, or the working groups that are pulled from them, is to provide an evidence review report on request, so that the advisors then have something to go on when they're making their policy recommendations. Our experts essentially get together in a room, we lock the doors and we don't unlock them until they finish their job, and they write a big fat evidence review report, which essentially takes the scoping paper that Karen mentioned, the scoping work that's been done to define the question, and provides the latest, best, highest quality scientific evidence to answer that question from as many different perspectives as are relevant. That evidence review is then handed back to the advisors for them to make use of when the advisors come up with their policy recommendations. Louise, the next slide, please. Thank you. We do also like to mention the importance to us of diversity and inclusiveness. Here you can see both diversity and inclusiveness within the advisors and within our working groups, where it's a very important criterion we use when choosing the experts. It's not just how expert they are, how relevant their expertise is to the topic, but also that they represent different dimensions of diversity. This is important not just out of considerations of justice and fairness, but also because we firmly believe, and we have good evidence to show, that it improves the quality and usefulness of scientific advice when the advisors come from diverse backgrounds and perspectives. Your next slide, please, Louise. Thank you. Just really briefly here, we have crammed onto one slide all the topics on which the SAM has given advice since it was created. For nearly all of these, it has been an evidence review report from SAPEA, followed by a scientific opinion by the advisors. There are a few where the process has worked slightly differently, but broadly speaking, these are the kinds of areas we cover. It's worth mentioning that, as Karen said, the European Commission has various sources of science and evidence advice, including its own in-house joint research centre. So where the scientific advice mechanism excels, and where it has its unique selling point, as it were, is that we're very good at these longer term, more systemic, broader questions. So we answer questions like, how does the European Union create a sustainable food system? Or how should the European Union manage strategic crises in the future? These topics are the kind of things where many different disciplines, many different perspectives can be brought together in quite a reflective way, and we can give kind of overall holistic advice rather than being asked technical questions like, I don't know, which chemical should be approved for use for this particular purpose or whatever, which tends to be done by other scientific advisory bodies that the Commission has access to. I think I have one more slide, don't I, Louise? Two more slides. Okay, they are okay. As well as our main mandate to deliver scientific advice, the SAM has a couple of other tricks up its sleeve. We have a mandate to build community. This is not just developing capacity among our own academies, which is very important, but also to develop more broadly the community of science for policy actors in Europe and beyond. And as a part of that, we hold an annual conference series for that community, which has started to become now basically the meeting point for the science advice community in Europe. And our next one is going to be in May in Vienna. We also have a communications and outreach program, which includes not just public events promoting our own work, but also activities to promote and strengthen dialogue and understanding among citizens about the importance of evidence and how it informs policy and how it should inform policy. And a small part of that is a podcast we produce every 2 weeks on issues and science advice, which remains the world's only podcast focusing on scientific advice specifically. And we also, now and then, when it takes our fancy, get involved in a bit of scholarship in developing, for instance, our own principles on scientific advice for policy and society, which originated in us writing our own rule book, but have more broadly become a reference point for other organisations that want to do something similar. Next slide, please. This is yours, Louise.
Yep, so this is where I take over. We are running behind, so I'm going to have to speed up, and there's quite a lot of information here. So just get a flavour of what it is that I'm addressing. I just wanted to give a few examples of the SAM in action. And the very first topic that we covered was looking at food from the oceans, and this was way back in 2016-17. And we were looking at whether you can get more food and biomass from the world's seas without detriment to future society. Karen mentioned the scoping paper, and we will always go back, and our starting point is the scoping paper. Now, for people from the UK, you might be saying, well, what's this got to do with us? We're no longer in the European Union. But absolutely, UK experts are welcome to be part of the SAPEA working groups. So in Food from the Oceans, we had 3 people from the UK. And again, you might be thinking, well, this is maybe just for Russell Group people, but no. Pat Harvey is from the University of Greenwich, John Ingram from Oxford, and Daniela Schmidt, who's a member of the Young Academy of Europe, is from Bristol. And this working group crossed all disciplines, the humanities, social sciences, and the natural sciences. I've gone back rather than forward. So the scientific opinion drew heavily on the evidence review report. I'm not going to go into the recommendations now. You can read them on the website. And Pearl Dijkstra, who we're going to hear from in a minute, was one of the major contributors to this opinion. We also, as Toby said, do a lot of outreach work, and we worked with a UK-based company called Science Made Simple on some infographics for this topic. And you can see here what sticks in my mind from 8 years ago are the infographics that conveyed a lot of the information that was in the reports. There was also a very nice poster that you can see in the middle. And we also went along to food and science festivals where the public could engage with this topic. We measure impact, and part of that is citation impact, but not the only measure. So we look at academic impact, we look at where this has been cited in EU legislation, and we look at wider policy impact. So there are reports where national governments, member states, so for instance, the government of Ireland on this one, and also international agencies. So the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization has cited this work in their own reports. Next example, for those of you who are interested in science advice itself, was a piece of work we did called Making Sense of Science. So how you provide good science advice to policymakers. Again, the SAPEA working group had people from the UK involved and from different disciplines. So on the right, you can see Susan Owens from Cambridge, and the chap at the bottom is Andy Sterling from Sussex. And this report looks at science, broadly defined, as a source for policy advice, how you use it in policy making, and how you can improve science advice. I'm not going to go into the recommendations of the opinion. Again, Pearl Dijkstra was heavily involved. But if you want to find out more, then I recommend this video, which is on the website, which Toby and I were very heavily involved in producing, and Pearl had a starring role in summarising what was in the opinion. Again, we measure impact. So this had quite a lot of impact on science diplomacy and on science advice systems that were being created in member states, and again was picked up by international agencies. The last one, as an example, is the most recent, and this one's looking at biodegradability of plastics. And this was effectively asking us to look at whether there were instances where biodegradable plastics might make sense to use in applications in the open environment. And you can see some examples there: mulch film, fireworks, we had a lot of those in the UK last week, and fishing equipment, so things like nets and ropes that get dumped in the sea. Again, this was a working group across all disciplines. We had 2 UK people. One we're going to hear from in a minute, Richard Thompson from the University of Plymouth, and another one, an environmental psychologist from Cardiff University. So this one, again, you can look up the recommendations, but I remember the most important thing with this one is it's not only what the plastic is made from, but where it ends up in the open environment. So something that might biodegrade in the Sahara Desert may not biodegrade in Birmingham, where I am now. Outreach work that was done, I think, is this one that was a public experiment at in Bergen in Norway, where they took a tank of water from cold Norwegian fjords, complete with fish, and they suspended biodegradable plastic samples in the water and periodically sent off these samples to see whether, if, and how far they'd biodegraded, which I think was a really interesting public experiment. Again, impact, plenty of impact on this one, particularly in this policy framework that the Commission produced on bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastic. 2 important pieces of work coming up to look out for. One on solar radiation modification, which is a very controversial topic, which should be coming out in the next couple of months. And one that's coming out the day after tomorrow, on Friday, looking at One Health, and in particular, One Health governance. So lots of information that you can get off the website, and I'm going to move on at this point to Richard Thompson, who worked on biodegradable plastics. Richard.
Well, thank you, Louise. And I think my role really is to talk about the science advice mechanism from a personal perspective. And of course, I believe in it and fully endorse it for all the reasons that the previous speakers have said. And I've participated in 2 SAPIA evidence reviews. The first one, the scientific perspective on microplastics in nature and society, and more recently, biodegradability of plastics in the open environment. And my experience working in both of those expert groups, I would say was absolutely tremendous and was really important in advancing my own career. And I want to talk about that a little bit on the next slide, if we can. So, you know, why would you want to participate in all of this, apart from, of course, you know, the sheer importance of trying to make sure that the scientific evidence that you've gathered from your own research reaches policy audiences. And that's a key reason for me. But there are also opportunities as an individual and for organizations. I think there's particularly important opportunities for early career researchers, but this is also open to more senior researchers like myself. And it was emphasized earlier on in the talk, those equal opportunities across the diversity from early career right through to senior. And that I would absolutely endorse. I saw someone asking for the evidence on that, but I'd absolutely endorse from the working groups I've participated in the importance of that, the quality of the reports that we produce. of course, to me, there's also a real benefit in being able to participate in, share in a rich dialogue with key researchers that are working on a topic of interest to you, your own academic interest, but also those who come from different disciplines. So there's an emphasis that, you know, this working groups can stretch into, of course, the social sciences, arts and humanities. And to me, one of the best ways to help to frame and improve the research that I'm doing is actually to listen to and acknowledge the pushback from other disciplines, because that helps me refine the way that I look at the particular problems that I'm interested in as an environmental scientist. So it was really key to me to have this rich opportunity for dialogue. And then, of course, there are opportunities that emerge from all of this to present these research outcomes from the superior evidence reviews at high-profile events. And so I was delighted, you know, honoured to present on behalf of the European Commission to the G7 the outcomes of one of those reports at a meeting held, I think it was at the start of the Canadian presidency, actually, but we were in Washington. And then finally, in here, it's difficult to really, you can't track any golden thread between one and the other, but having completed the evidence review on biodegradability of plastics in the environment, this put me and my team in a really strong position to apply for UKRI funding on a highlight topic, which was very much positioned on this topic about biodegradability and bioplastics in the environment. And we were indeed successful in securing that. And as I say, you can't link one to the other, but having benefited from all of those rich dialogues and being part of the science policy interface, being aware of what the key policy questions were, and then being able to translate those into a funding application, I think to me it's undeniable that it increased the strength and the likelihood of success of what was indeed ultimately for me a successful application for as a project lead for a £2.6 million project. So there's a whole range of benefits, I would say there. I think that's it from me. Thank you.
And moving on to Pearl.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for inviting me. And I want to echo what Richard was saying. He exudes enthusiasm. And I had the honor to be one of the chief scientific advisors right from the start, and I fulfilled my 5 years. And it's been one of the most fulfilling periods of my working life. Can we go to the next slide, please? I come from the social sciences, and I can remember at the very start that the then chair of the group of chief science advisors, Rolf Hoyer, who is the director general of CERN, would lean over the table and say to me, "But Pearl, what you do isn't science, is it?" Believe me, we parted as the best of friends. But what I did learn there, and I wasn't aware of it until I was actually trying to help translate the evidence into recommendations. And I thought, hey, this is social sciences, because what do we as social sciences think of? We think of things like institutions and the cultural climate and motivations and social networks and power dynamics and values. And I want to give you one example of where we translated these ideas, or at least two of them, into a basis for recommendations. And it was the cybersecurity recommendations. And we were thinking about power dynamics. And where does the power lie? It lies with those who own the data. So we switched it around and said, we have to enable citizens, or at least the European Commission, we recommended that to the European Commission, that they have easier control over their own data. And remember, this is before the GDPR. Another way of looking at the power dynamics was to emphasize something that is called contextual identity, and that is refraining if you're on a website, refraining from asking more information, personal information, than is necessary. Of course, if I'm going to buy alcohol, people have to know what my age is, but they don't have to know about my household composition. They don't have to know whether I have children, et cetera, et cetera. So we said, European Commission, legislate this. Another, and this is a more the normative component, we looked at where do a lot of the cybersecurity incidents take place? Well, it's in something called the Internet of Things. Think of remote controls or these electronic doorbells. And we said, we realized, or this came out of the evidence, that a lot of junk is being dumped in the market. And we said, no, producers, you must have a duty of care to not throw junk onto the market, but thoroughly test it before it's admitted into the market. And another was, it's a different way of looking at values, but it's also about transparency and sharing knowledge about data breaches, because companies can learn from the data breaches in other companies. And this approach to cybersecurity is such a very different approach from which is the typical one, which focuses on the military, on the police. And what we did is we focused on citizens and the quality of products. Next one, please. And as Louise showed, she showed how often the work is being cited, and I can attest to that. And we can see in European Union or European Commission, European Parliament documents that they cite or have used our information. And why is what we're doing, why is it effective? One is we are shown to be trustworthy. We demonstrate our impartiality. We declare our interests. We do not do anything policy for science. And when we talk about declaring interests, it also includes our personal research interests. We work in a consultative way, and this is what was nicely described by Karen, that we touch base regularly with the policymakers. Like, is this really what you meant in the scoping paper? Well, we can, what if we change the question, because then it becomes a question that is better addressed by science advice. And this way, there's a greater certainty that the advice will be used. And next is, and this is a point that Ola made, we rely on the best available evidence, and that's why we're so incredibly happy with SAPEA, and what I hear now is 120 academies who provide experts to work on the evidence reviews. And a final point, and this is also brought forward by Karen, is that when you make a recommendation, it helps to know the policy landscape. What's on the agenda of the commissioners? Where does a commissioner have to speak? When is the next G7 meeting? Is a review coming up? Is it a monitoring exercise? So if you tailor your recommendations to one of these actions, there's also a greater likelihood that the advice will be used. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all the speakers for very informative and incisive comments. We are, as Luis already said, running somewhat late, but just now, as it so happens, there are actually no questions in the Q&A. So in order to get the ball rolling, as it were, I will start out. There was actually, for a brief moment, flashing over the screen, a question in relation to diversity. And somebody asked, is there actually evidence that diversity of working groups is a good thing? I don't think that it would be very easy to provide actual evidence for this. But the point is, and that's my personal view, is that diversity is not just a question of what some cynics would say, woke culture. The point is that experts inevitably are biased. Everyone who is knowledgeable in a particular subject inevitably has strong opinions about that. And if you only have people selected from a particular group, there is often a tendency for that particular group to have a kind of group think, as people say. So diversity actually helps in order to prevent dominance in a particular biased direction. And that's why diversity is important. It's not a question of just ticking some DEI box that some people are getting a bit tired of, but it's really an important point in terms of getting advice that is robust and is not too influenced by a particular bias. Now there is actually a question here which I hope I can see, because constantly things are popping up on the screen in front of other things. Is there a mechanism where scientists, I would be very grateful if these constant pop-ups could disappear for a moment, because it actually makes it impossible to read the question and answer. So is there a mechanism where scientists can contribute to the scoping papers? We are participants in several relevant Horizon Europe projects. Well, it's not really possible for everyone to participate in a free-for-all, but there are ways in which you can make your expertise known to the local academies. And probably, I think that Pearl Dijkstra, as a former group of chief scientific advisor, could sort of answer that question in a bit more detail. Pearl.
Oh, definitely. And what is new, and what you also saw in Toby's slides, is YASAS. Don't ask me what the acronym stands for. Young Academy. But this
Science
is
advice structure. It is.
Okay, but here it's young academy members who there are many young academies at universities. There's the Young Academy of Europe. Get in touch with these people. And another way is to attend the conferences on policy advising in Europe. They are organized on a regular basis, and the person who would know more about this is Toby. And I'm going to use the fact that I've got the screen now to say goodbye to you all, because I have to go and chair a meeting now at 3. But I thought this was absolutely interesting. Anybody who wants to get in touch with me, don't hesitate to do so. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, Louise wants to say something. Louise?
No, I was just waving at Pearl, but also,
sorry.
Just to say, on the scoping, we often have scoping workshops where scientific experts become involved. So that's an answer to a question somebody was asking about getting involved in the scoping process.
Okay. So we could take up a few other things, and I will just sort of mention what maybe was not mentioned, that on other strengths of the SAPEA scientific evidence process is, of course, that the reports are peer-reviewed. So not only do we have a broad group in the working group, but at the end of the process, there is actually a detailed peer review from yet another group of experts. So we really go out of our way to make sure that the scientific evidence reports really represent the best of science, is authoritative, and comes from reliable backgrounds, and is as free of bias as it possibly can. We actually have a quite detailed quality guideline. I was one of the authors of the quality guideline that sets out in very considerable detail the rules for how an evidence review report should be produced. I have been told that we have to finish on time, so I think maybe we should just give a final word to Richard and Pearl, who are sort of heavyweight people who have been in this, to draw perhaps together what you sort of feel is a good conclusion from this webinar. So Richard maybe first, and then I will let Pearl have the final word.
I noticed that Karen had got her hand raised. I don't know if she wanted to add something first, briefly.
Yeah, thanks. I was interested in just responding to Sarah's comment in the chat. How do we help overcome departmental silos within individual nations to take up policy recommendations which might span multiple departments? Just to mention that we have another activity within the unit, which is on science for policy. And this spring, we launched a mutual learning and mobilization exercise with about 16 member states that were keen to work with us on strengthening their own science for policy interfaces, because we recognize that individual countries have different realities, and some of them do work seamlessly across these departmental silos, and others do not. And so there is a keenness in furthering this capacity to do so, not just to take up policy recommendations in a more holistic, integrated way, but also to provide the evidence to support issues that are, more holistic and more systemic. And these issues, this will be part also of the conference that Toby mentioned that will be held in Vienna. So you're very welcome to join us for that event.
I mean, I see the comment about lack of biodiversity reports on the website. Of course, the reports and the work that we undertake is to some extent driven by the policy needs. So it's yeah, it would be lovely to see those, but we're driven by requests to a large extent.
I think, William, you had your hand up. You wanted to say something? No. Okay, I think then we are at the very end, so I will give the final word to Pearl.
But Pearl is gone, Ole, so...
Oh, she's gone already.
Over to
Okay,
you.
well, it is actually 2 o'clock, and I have been given very stern instructions that we must finish absolutely on time. So since there are no also any further questions on Q&A, it seems that everybody has been satisfied by the presentations and feel that they now have a good understanding of the European Scientific Advice Mechanism. And that's really excellent. So many thanks to UPEN. That was our thanks to William as the representative of UPEN for having enabled this seminar, and many thanks to Louise and her team in the Cardiff Academia Europaea unit for having worked very effectively on the organization. And of course, thank you to all of you for participating at this very busy time of the year. So we close this seminar now, and thank you to everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Just the next